Chapter 1. The Static Bloom. The rain in the Thunder Shelf wasn't rain at all. It was a static bloom, a perpetual, violet haze that clung to the jagged peaks and choked the air with a metallic tang. It tasted of ozone and burnt metal, a flavor that coated the tongue like a film of frost. Below, the valley pulsed with a sickly, rhythmic thrum, the heartbeat of the Shogun's dominion. Juro didn't feel the rain, not in the way a man should. He registered it as a subtle shift in the magnetic field, a minor fluctuation that adjusted the delicate balance within his own physiology. He stood on a ridge of shale, the gray stone biting cold against his worn indigo kimono, a garment that had seen 100 storms and 1,000 battles, mostly against things that weren't visible. His movements were deliberate, economical. Each step was a measured assessment, a constant calibration of pressure against the earth. The tattered fabric flowed around him like liquid shadow, concealing a body sculpted by stillness. Deep, charcoal-black channels, etched into his skin with a precision that bordered on obsessive, traced patterns across his arms and chest conduits for the storm's electricity. A grotesque, beautiful circuitry. These were the legacy of the bind, the ritual that had granted him his singular existence, replacing his failing heart with a Lodestone-Core, a shard of ancient, magnetically charged rock. He wasn't waiting. He was the waiting. Across the valley, in the copper spires of the Shogun's palace, the static intensified. It wasn't a chaotic burst, it was a controlled, agonizing escalation, like a surgeon meticulously severing a nerve. The Jitter-Puppets, the villagers forced into servitude, continued their tasks maintaining the colossal machinery, scrubbing the metallic floors, endlessly adjusting dials and levers, each movement dictated by the flow of electricity surging through their limbs. They were not alive in the traditional sense, not anymore. They were intricate, horrifying components in the Shogun's eternal machine. Juro had been tracking the Shogun Lord Kaito, they called him, though the name sounded brittle, like a porcelain doll shattered against stone for 7 cycles of the Crimson Moon. 7 years since Head abandoned his clan. The Serpent's Fang, a splinter group of ronin dedicated to upholding a forgotten code of honor in a world drowning in the Shogun's corrupting influence. 7 years since Head became the Groundwalker. He wasn't a warrior seeking glory. He was a correction. A flicker of movement caught his attention. Tora, the magnetic cat, emerged from the shadow of a basalt outcrop. The creature was a paradox, a creature of raw, untamed instinct, trapped within a shell of shifting iron filings. Its fur wasn't simply colored with iron. It was iron, a swirling, chaotic cloud that responded to the slightest magnetic disturbance. It moved with a predatory grace, its large, intelligent eyes, the color of quenched steel, scanning the valley. Tora was a polarity stalker, a being born from the catastrophic experiments conducted by Kaito's alchemists, experiments meant to weaponize the static itself. Juro didn't reach for his weapon, the Earth-Tether. It wasn't a traditional katana. Forged from non-conductive volcanic jade, it was a channel, a receptor for the very force that sought to destroy him. The blade was dull, gray, almost lifeless, but when activated, it severed electrical currents with brutal efficiency. He simply observed Tora, a silent acknowledgement of their symbiotic partnership. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The rhythmic thrum of the valley intensified, becoming a violent pulse. The violet bloom thickened, coalescing into a shimmering, almost tangible wave of energy. Juro recognized it instantly, the Volt Knights. Kaito's elite guard, clad in armor crackling with blue energy, were advancing. Their spears, tipped with refined lightning conductors, were designed to deliver a fatal jolt, instantly incapacitating anyone within their range. They were beautiful, terrifying weapons. As the first of the knights crested the ridge, their movements were fluid, unnatural, guided by the Shogun's control. Each spear was raised, aimed directly at Juro's position. The air around them shimmered with heat, and the ozone scent thickened, almost choking. Juro didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply absorbed. The lightning spears, instead of striking him, were drawn towards him, flowing through the channels etched into his skin, channeled through his Lodestone-Core, and dissipating into the mountain, feeding the static bloom, nourishing the Shogun's power. Tora, sensing the change, launched himself. A storm of razor-sharp iron dust erupted from the cat's fur, engulfing the approaching knights. The metallic shards, imbued with a focused magnetic field, jammed the joints of their armor, disrupting their movements, turning their advanced technology into a chaotic mess. The ground became a swirling vortex of lightning and iron. Juro remained a silent anchor, a point of absolute stillness amidst the maelstrom. He was a wound in the Shogun's design, a glitch in his meticulously constructed system. And he was just beginning. Chapter 2. Static Bloom. The rain intensified, a cold metallic drizzle that clung to the copper spires of the Shogun's palace and slicked the jade of Juro's Earth-Tether. The initial assault of the Volt Knights had been a brutal demonstration of the Shogun's power, a terrifying dance of controlled chaos. But Juro and Tora were proving to be a far more insidious threat, a corruption of the Shogun's very foundations. As the last of the magnetic dust settled, revealing the grotesquely frozen knights, their armor fractured and useless, a new wave of Volt Knights arrived. This vanguard was smaller, more disciplined, and bore a distinct feature: miniature, humming generators integrated into their armor, constantly feeding energy back to the central dynamo. They weren't simply conduits for lightning, they were amplifiers, attempting to seize Juro's energy absorption and redirect it back to the Shogun. "The serpent seeks to swallow its own tail," Juro murmured, his voice a low rumble as he shifted slightly, adjusting his stance. The charcoal channels on his skin pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. They realized they cannot destroy the source. This realization fueled a chillingly methodical advance. The new knights, led by a particularly imposing figure, clad in obsidian armor that absorbed even the ambient light, utilized a new tactic. Instead of direct attacks, they unleashed concentrated bursts of static, shimmering walls of disruptive energy that disrupted Juro's control, creating momentary tremors within his body, forcing a feedback loop of electricity through his Lodestone-Core. Tora reacted instantly. The cat became a whirlwind of iron, not just targeting the knight's armor, but actively disrupting the static fields. The magnetic filings in the cat's fur, finely tuned by the Shogun's experiments, began to vibrate at specific frequencies, creating a counter-resonance that destabilized the knight's attacks. It was a desperate, intricate struggle, a battle of magnetic forces waged on a scale invisible to the naked eye. Juro, meanwhile, stood motionless, a black void against the swirling chaos. He wasn't attacking, not directly. Instead, he was meticulously building a shield, drawing every stray pulse of static, every ripple of energy, into himself. He felt the agonizing burn, the constant strain on his core, but he refused to yield. He was not merely absorbing, he was shaping the energy, channeling it, converting it into a force that threatened to tear the palace apart. The Obsidian Knight, noticing the change, bellowed an order, his voice amplified through a voxcaster built into his helmet. "Increase the flux. Override Juro's dampening field. Sever his connection." The generators in the armor of the surrounding knights pulsed with a blinding blue light. The static walls intensified, coalescing into a concentrated beam aimed directly at Juro. This wasn't a spear, it was a focused bolt of pure disruptive energy. Just as the beam was about to strike, Tora launched himself with a ferocity that bordered on berserk. The iron storm erupted, but this time, it wasn't solely about hindering movement. The cat focused the magnetic energy, channeling it through a series of intricate patterns in the air, a shimmering, geometric cage of iron dust that enveloped the beam before it could reach Juro. The beam shattered against the cage, releasing a wave of raw energy that overloaded the generators in the Obsidian Knight's armor. The knight collapsed, his obsidian suit sparking and smoking, a husk of frozen metal. But the effect was temporary. The Shogun, detecting the disruption in his network, amplified the attack, unleashing a secondary pulse directly into Juro. This pulse bypassed the iron cage, striking the Lodestone-Core with brutal force. Juro roared, a sound of pure agony. The channels on his skin flared with incandescent light, and his body shuddered violently. He stumbled, momentarily losing his footing, the mountain beneath him trembling. Then, something unexpected happened. As the energy surged through him, he didn't dissipate. Instead, he transformed. The charcoal channels on his skin began to glow with an intense, sapphire blue. The Earth-Tether in his hand pulsed with a vibrant, almost organic light. The magnetic burial, he gasped, his voice now a resonant hum. I am not merely a sink, I am a conduit. He raised the Earth-Tether, and the jade blade began to spin, drawing the electric energy not just into himself, but outwards, projecting a field of raw, controlled electricity that enveloped the entire chamber. The remaining Volt Knights were caught in the field, their armor short-circuiting, their movements erratic, their energy weapons useless. The Shogun's palace, a fortress of copper and electricity, was now caught in a self-induced storm, a localized, but incredibly potent, geomagnetic event. Juro stood at its center, a black silhouette illuminated by the pulsating blue light of his blade, a man becoming a weapon, a force of absolute stillness against the tide of unrelenting power. He wasn't just fighting the Shogun, he was rewriting the rules of the game. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Core. The storm within the Shogun's palace intensified. A breathtaking ballet of controlled chaos. Juro, now radiating a palpable field of blue energy, moved with an unnerving grace, a predator in a cathedral of sparking metal. The Volt Knights, once symbols of the Shogun's dominion, were reduced to twitching automata, their magnetized armor twisting and snapping under the relentless barrage of Juro's amplified energy. Their glass spears lay shattered, glittering shards reflecting the sapphire light, like miniature frozen lightning. Tora, meanwhile, operated with a terrifying precision. The magnetic cat's iron-filing fur, now shimmering with a deeper, almost amethyst hue, wasn't simply disrupting the knight's movements, it was actively attracting stray electrical currents, feeding them back into Juro's field. The cat moved like a shadow, a living conductor, anticipating the volatile shifts in the energy, weaving through the chaos with deadly effectiveness. The Shogun, still a skeletal husk within his plasma cage, roared a sound that was less vocalization and more a shattering of compressed air, a furious, futile attempt to regain control. The cage pulsed violently, attempting to contain the burgeoning energy, but Juro's altered state was proving impervious. The magnetic burial hadn't just made him a sink, it had transformed him into a resonant chamber, amplifying every surge, directing it with an instinctive understanding. You cling to the illusion of power, Juro said, his voice a low, grinding rumble, laced with the crackle of controlled energy. Electricity is nothing but motion, a fleeting dance. I offer stillness. He raised the Earth-Tether, the jade blade spinning faster now, carving intricate patterns in the air, each rotation leaving a brief, searing trail of blue light. The Volt Knights, even in their erratic state, attempted a desperate final stand. One, a particularly large knight named Kaito, managed to focus a residual blast of energy from his shattered spear, a pathetic flicker against Juro's encompassing field. But before the blast could fully materialize, Tora launched himself, a blur of iron and muscle. The cat's fur flared, drawing Kaito's energy directly into himself. And with a sickening snap, the knight's remaining arm, fused with a mass of pulsing, magnetized iron, detached and became another weapon in Juro's arsenal. Juro didn't engage in close combat. He used the energy field to isolate, to systematically dismantle the remaining knights. He didn't seek to destroy them completely, he aimed to render them inert, to strip them of their power, to return them to the silent, unfeeling shells they were before the Shogun's influence. As the last knight fell, collapsing into a heap of sparking metal and shattered glass, the intensity of the storm within the palace shifted. The blue light emanating from Juro's blade intensified, bathing the chamber in an almost unbearable brilliance. The ground beneath his feet began to vibrate subtly, and he felt a deep, resonating throb within his Lodestone-Core, a feedback loop of immense energy. Suddenly, the Shogun's cage began to crackle with an unprecedented intensity. The blue plasma within shifted, twisting into grotesque, serpentine shapes. The Shogun, realizing the depth of Juro's transformation, unleashed a new surge of energy, a focused beam of raw, chaotic electricity designed not to vaporize, but to overload. This wasn't a controlled discharge, it was a desperate, instinctual reaction, a rejection of Juro's dominance. The beam struck Juro directly, and for a heart-stopping moment, he faltered. The channels on his skin burned white-hot, his body convulsing violently. The blue light dimmed, and the Earth-Tether fell from his grasp, clattering against the copper floor. But then, something remarkable happened. Instead of being overwhelmed, Juro absorbed the blast. The chaotic energy flowed through him, not as a destructive force, but as a complex, cascading pattern. He didn't just withstand it, he understood it, felt its rhythms, and mirrored it. "You fear stillness," he said, his voice now almost completely devoid of human inflection, a perfect harmonic resonance. "But stillness is the greatest power. It allows you to see the flow, to manipulate the very currents of existence." With a single deliberate movement, Juro gathered the energy surging through him and channeled it back into the Earth-Tether. The jade blade exploded with a blinding light, projecting a wall of pure, concentrated electricity that enveloped the Shogun's cage. The cage, already weakened, shattered entirely. The Shogun, deprived of his power source, ceased to pulse, becoming a statue of frozen fury, a monument to ambition and hubris. As the last vestiges of energy dissipated, Juro stood amidst the ruins of the palace, his skin permanently etched with the sapphire blue, the Earth-Tether in his hand now pulsing with a subdued, steady light. Tora approached, rubbing against his leg, the amethyst shimmer of its fur calming the residual thrum within him. The air remained thick with the scent of ozone, and the only sound was the soft drip of water echoing through the devastated chamber. Juro looked down at his hand, at the Earth-Tether, and a single profound thought resonated within him. The work was not yet finished. The ground needed tending. Chapter 4. Resonance of Rust. The silence in the Thunder Shelf's heart wasn't peaceful. It was a suspended breath, thick with the metallic tang of decay and the lingering ghosts of raw power. Rain, driven by a sudden, unexpected squall, hammered against the fractured copper spires, washing over the shattered remains of the Volt Knight's grotesque sculptures of ionized steel and shattered glass. Juro knelt, meticulously examining the twisted remains of one knight's spear. Ah! The glass tube, once a conduit for lethal electricity, was now a brittle, iridescent husk. Tora, ever vigilant, circled him, its iron filing fur shifting in the rain, a subtle tremor running through its form. The cat's presence wasn't comforting in the human sense, it was a constant, measurable presence, a point of magnetic equilibrium in a landscape of disrupted currents. "The Shogun's ambition," Juro murmured, his voice a dry rasp like stone grinding against stone, was built upon dissonance. He sought to force harmony, to bend the world to his will through brute, channeled energy. But true harmony arises from acceptance, from understanding the inherent rhythms, the patterns. He raised the Earth-Tether, the jade now a dull obsidian gray, reflecting the bruised purple of the sky. He disrupted the natural flow, and in doing so, created his own prison. He stood, moving with a grace that defied his ravaged appearance, and began to systematically dismantle the remaining machinery of the dynamo. It wasn't destruction for its own sake. Juro wasn't concerned with obliterating the Shogun's creation, he was carefully, surgically dismantling its components, severing the remaining connections, disrupting the flow of energy. He treated the intricate clockwork and pulsating coils with a detached reverence, as if they were delicate organisms, diseased and requiring careful extraction. The jolt was a wound, he explained, his gaze fixed on a particularly complex regulator, a spider web of brass and blackened wiring, a wound inflicted by arrogance. To heal it, we must introduce a counter-resonance, a grounding. As he worked, Tora moved with a newfound urgency, its metallic fur acting as a siphon, drawing stray currents from the decaying machinery. The cat's movements became almost frantic, a frantic dance of magnetic attraction and repulsion, as if struggling to contain the residual energy. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the palace. Stronger this time, a sympathetic shudder in the stone itself. The rain intensified, transforming into a torrential downpour, and a thin blue haze began to coalesce around Juro's body. The channels in his skin glowed with a brighter sapphire luminescence, and his Lodestone-Core throbbed with a palpable intensity. "The system is attempting to re-establish itself," he said, his voice deepening, resonating with an almost unbearable frequency. "It seeks to repair the damage, to reassert its control. It's a desperate, futile effort." He raised the Earth-Tether, not to attack, but to absorb. The jade blade pulsed with a furious, almost blinding light, drawing the errant energy not outwards, but inwards, feeding it into the core of his being. He was becoming a receptor, a crucible for the Shogun's chaotic legacy. Around him, the air shimmered, distorting the ruined architecture. The rain seemed to part, revealing glimpses of a crystalline structure beneath the copper, a network of interwoven energy pathways. Juro was not simply neutralizing the energy, he was mapping it, learning its patterns, becoming a living conduit for its chaotic flow. "The Shogun believed himself master of energy," he intoned, his voice growing steadily louder. "But he was merely a conductor. Energy is not a weapon, it is a song. And the most potent songs are not those of force, but those of stillness." With a final sweeping gesture of the Earth-Tether, Juro unleashed a wave of pure modulated energy. It wasn't a destructive blast, but a precise harmonic resonance, a carefully crafted note that struck the heart of the dynamo's remaining activity. The machine shuddered, sputtered, and then, with a final mournful whine, fell silent. The blue haze dissipated, and the rain began to subside, the sky slowly lightening to a bruised gray. Tora, exhausted but invigorated, nuzzled against Juro's leg, its iron-filing fur now pulsing with a calming, rhythmic vibration. Juro lowered the Earth-Tether, the jade blade returning to its dull, gray state. He surveyed the devastation, the fractured spires, the shattered machinery, the frozen statue of the Shogun, not with sadness, but with a profound sense of completion. "The work is not yet finished," he said, his voice returning to its near-silent resonance, "but the ground it begins to breathe again. We have merely introduced a note. Now we must learn to play the entire melody." He looked out at the rain-washed horizon, a single, unwavering line of dark stone against the gray sky. The echoes of lightning still linger, but the silence holds a promise, the promise of a world grounded. Chapter 5. The Rusting Chorus. The rain continued its mournful rhythm, a constant, insistent percussion against the copper and shattered steel of the Shogun's palace. The air, still thick with the ghost of ozone and the metallic tang of burnt circuits, felt strangely cleaner. The Jitter-Puppets, once a writhing electric mass, lay motionless, their faces slack, their limbs frozen in postures of panicked servitude. The last vestiges of the Shogun's control, a barely perceptible tremor in the earth beneath Juro's feet, had vanished. Juro spent the next cycle, a period measured not in hours, but in the ebb and flow of the subterranean currents, had learned to sense meticulously assessing the damage. Tora, now almost completely still, a shimmering silhouette against the gray, occasionally emitted a low, humming vibration that seemed to resonate with the damaged machinery. Juro didn't order repairs. He didn't even inspect them. Instead, he used the Earth-Tether to draw the residual electrical charge from the shattered components, channeling it into the surrounding mountains. A slow, deliberate draining of the lingering energy. It was a painstaking process, a ritual of decontamination. The Shogun's ambition, Juro finally murmured, his voice a gravelly rasp, was to build a cathedral of noise, to drown out the silence. He was wrong. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the foundation upon which all true harmonies are built. He picked up a shard of copper, its surface still faintly radiating heat, and ran his calloused fingers along its edges. He sought to control the currents, but forgot that currents themselves are shaped by the landscape, by the earth. A small contingent of villagers, released from the Shogun's grasp and displaying a mixture of fear and bewildered gratitude, cautiously approached. They were a sparse group of farmers, a few artisans, a weathered old woman clutching a hand-woven tapestry depicting a forgotten waterfall, all marked by the subtle gray modeling that indicated prolonged exposure to the Galvanic-Slavery. They watched Juro and Tora with a profound, almost reverent, silence. One young man, a former blacksmith named Kenji, stepped forward, hesitantly offering Juro a polished piece of obsidian. A token of thanks. Ronin-sama, he stammered, his voice raw with disuse. Juro accepted the offering without acknowledging Kenji's gesture. He examined the obsidian, turning it over in his hand, feeling the subtle vibrations of the surrounding rock. Obsidian absorbs, he said simply. It holds the memory of heat, of pressure. It is a recorder of force. He then carefully placed the obsidian fragment back into Kenji's hand, his touch fleeting and impersonal. The Shogun's legacy isn't destruction, Juro continued, his gaze fixed on the rain-swept landscape. It is the rust, the corrosion of the spirit. We must not simply dismantle his machines. We must cleanse the wounds he inflicted. He gestured towards a cluster of shattered automata, the Volt Knights lying amidst the rubble. These were not built to kill. They were built to serve, to obey. Their purpose has been twisted, corrupted. They are now echoes of a terrible command. Suddenly, Tora emitted a series of sharp, rhythmic vibrations, escalating in intensity. The iron filings in its fur began to swirl, coalescing into a miniature vortex that spun with unsettling speed. Juro recognized the pattern. It was a complex harmonic sequence, a rusting chorus, a method had learned from ancient texts, a technique used to dismantle complex systems without resorting to outright destruction. He placed his hands on the ground, drawing upon the Earth's inherent magnetic field. He wasn't forcing a reaction, he was listening, amplifying the natural processes of decay, of corrosion. The metal shards around the Volt Knights began to visibly corrode, accelerating their disintegration into a shimmering, rust-colored dust. It wasn't violent, it was a slow, inevitable surrender. As the last of the knights dissolved into dust, Taurus vortex calmed, the iron filings settling back into their place, the cat's fur returning to its normal, shifting texture. Juro lifted his hands, a faint tremor running through him. The Shogun's power was built on control. But control is an illusion. All things eventually return to the earth. He turned his attention to the dynamo itself, the massive rotating core of the Shogun's power grid. It was a grotesque monument to ambition, a swirling vortex of blue energy contained within a cage of forged steel. We cannot simply extinguish this, he said, his voice gaining a note of solemnity. We must learn to direct it. Juro, alongside Tora, began a slow, deliberate process of introducing subtle harmonic frequencies into the machinery's rotation, gently coaxing it back to a natural, rhythmic pulse. It was a dangerous game, a delicate dance between control and chaos, but he felt a nascent sense of something approaching hope. Wad! The Groundwalker was not simply a warrior, he was becoming a caretaker, a shepherd of the Earth's own, resilient song. Chapter 6. Resonance of Rust. The rain continued, a relentless gray curtain drawn across the thunder shelf. It wasn't the violent downpour of earlier, but a finer, almost melancholic drizzle, each drop carrying the scent of ozone and decaying metal. The palace, once a monument to the shogun's tyrannical energy, now lay in a state of arrested entropy, a frozen tableau of shattered copper and solidified plasma. Juro and Tora moved through it with a quiet reverence, not of victory, but of respect for the forces they'd unleashed. The engineers, or what remained of them, the Jitter-Puppets, their movements now a hesitant, almost mournful dance, still tended to the ravaged machinery, attempting to salvage what little remained of the Shogun's grand design. They were a pathetic sight, their faces slack with a lingering, almost phantom pain, meticulously sweeping up the rust-colored dust with brushes fashioned from salvaged fibers. Juro observed them with a weary compassion, understanding the primal instinct to rebuild even in the face of annihilation. "The core still whispers," Tora murmured, his voice a low rumble like shifting iron. The magnetic cat had settled beside the dynamo, his fur now a subdued silver, the iron filings swirling around him in a slow hypnotic current. He was subtly shifting, adjusting the ambient magnetic field, as if attempting to soothe the wound in the machine. Juro knelt, his hands hovering over the exposed mechanism. The jade of Earth-Tether pulsed faintly, drawing on the residual energy, a ghost of the Shogun's frantic pulse. He didn't intend to repair it, not in the conventional sense. He was listening. He was amplifying the natural rhythms of decay, the ceaseless, patient work of time. He felt the subtle vibration of the remaining gears, the phantom resistance of the magnetic coils. He sought to impose order, to force a perfect rotation, Juro said, his voice a rasp of stone and wind. But existence itself is chaos, a constant flux. The Shogun tried to bind that chaos, to control it. He forgot that true power resides not in dominion, but in understanding the dance. He began a slow, deliberate process, not of dismantling, but of tuning. With deliberate movements, guided by an intuition he barely understood, he adjusted the position of a single, fractured cog, applying pressure with the tip of Earth-Tether. The air around him shimmered, not with the blinding flash of electricity, but with a faint, almost musical resonance. The effect was immediate, yet subtle. The rust-colored dust around the dynamo began to shift, swirling faster, as if drawn to a focal point. Tiny, crystalline structures formed within the rust, mimicking the intricate patterns of the machine's gears. It wasn't repair, it was mirroring. A reflection of the dynamo's intended function, amplified and accelerated by Juro's influence. The Shogun's ambition was built on steel and voltage, Juro continued, his face etched with concentration. But even steel decays, even voltage dissipates. We are simply accelerating the inevitable. Tora stirred, his fur shimmering violently as he reached out with his magnetic field, drawing upon the nascent energy. He wasn't forcing the dynamo to function, he was feeding it, nurturing the process of self-destruction. Suddenly, a piercing whine cut through the air, originating from the core of the dynamo. The gears, already warped and fractured, began to spin with increasing speed, emitting a high-pitched drone that resonated deep within Juro's bones. The copper casing of the dynamo began to glow with an internal light, a pale, sickly blue light. "Hess resisting," Juro grunted, bracing himself against the force of the spinning machinery. The Lodestone-Core within him throbbed with a painful intensity, the magnetic current surging through his veins. "He remembers," Tora said, his voice filled with a strange urgency. "He remembers the purpose for which he was built." Juro realized then that the Shogun wasn't simply a malfunctioning machine. He was a consciousness, a trapped, fractured echo of the ambition that had driven him to enslave the world. The dynamo wasn't a power source, it was a prison, a receptacle for the Shogun's fragmented will. With a final, desperate surge of effort, Juro reversed his own polarity, amplifying the magnetic field around him. He didn't attack the dynamo directly. He aimed his power at the periphery, at the tiny crystalline structures forming within the rust, the nascent echoes of the Shogun's intended design. The effect was catastrophic. The crystalline structures shattered, exploding into a shower of iridescent shards. The dynamo's rotation intensified, escalating into a chaotic frenzy. The blue glow pulsed violently, growing brighter and brighter until it threatened to engulf the entire palace. "He is breaking free!" Juro yelled, shielding his eyes. "We must sever the connection!" As the Shogun's consciousness surged forth, manifesting as a wave of pure energy, Tora unleashed his full power. The magnetic field around the cat expanded, forming a vortex that drew the energy towards itself. The vortex intensified, becoming a swirling maelstrom of iron filings and raw electricity. Finally, with a blinding flash, the Shogun's energy dissipated, leaving behind only silence and the scent of ozone. The dynamo sputtered and died, its gears frozen in a grotesque imitation of motion. Juro collapsed, his body racked with pain, his skin stained a deeper shade of gray. He looked down at the Earth-Tether in his hand, now dull and lifeless, its connection to the earth severed. Tora approached, nuzzling his head with his iron-furred muzzle. "It is done," he murmured. "The resonance has ceased." Chapter 7. Echoes in the stone. The silence that followed the Shogun's annihilation was not peaceful. It was a cold, brittle stillness, layered with the residue of raw power and a profound, unsettling emptiness. The copper spires of the palace, once vibrant with channeled energy, now reflected a bruised, rain-streaked sky, their surfaces dull and strangely silent. The air still carried the faintest tang of ozone, a ghost of the storm that had raged within. Juro remained sprawled amidst the wreckage of the dynamo, his body a charcoal sculpture against the stained marble floor. The Lodestone-Core within him throbbed with a dull, agonizing rhythm, a constant reminder of the energy he had absorbed, the force had unleashed. He shifted slightly, a movement that sent a tremor through the ruined machinery, and winced. The pain wasn't sharp, like a mortal wound, but a slow, grinding erosion of his very being. The channels in his skin pulsed with a colder, almost glacial light. Tora circled him, his iron-furred coat shimmering with an internal luminescence, as if trying to absorb the lingering echoes of the Shogun's power. He nudged Juro's hand with his head, a low rumble vibrating from his chest, a sound that felt less like a cat's purr and more like the groan of tectonic plates. "The resonant sight lingers," Tora finally murmured, his voice a subtle shift in the magnetic field around him, like a forgotten prayer etched onto stone. Juro slowly sat up, his movements deliberate, each motion weighted with an impossible stillness. He examined his Earth-Tether, the jade blade now a monochrome testament to the battle. It was cold to the touch, utterly devoid of energy. He gripped it, not with the practiced grip of a warrior, but with the desperate reverence of a man clinging to a fading memory. "The palace it remembers," he rasped, his voice a brittle echo. The Shogun's ambition, his obsession with control, it's not simply extinguished. It's woven into the very structure. He gestured with the blade toward the intricate carvings that adorned the walls, depictions of the Shogun's rise to power, his military campaigns, his elaborate clockwork mechanisms. Each image seemed to shimmer with a faint blue luminescence, a spectral replay of the man's thoughts, his desires. "He sought to master energy," Juro continued. "But energy, like water, finds a way to flow. The palace wasn't just a prison, it was a conduit, a vessel for his ambition. And we merely disrupted the flow." A low, grinding sound echoed from the depths of the palace. Juro stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for his blade. Tora immediately positioned himself between Juro and the source of the noise, his fur bristling with static. "Something stirs," Tora growled, his gaze fixed on the darkened corridors. "The echo, it's not gone. It's shifting." They moved cautiously, following the sound to a vast chamber dominated by a colossal, inverted funnel, a colossal basin of polished obsidian, etched with shimmering circuits that resembled the patterns of a brain. The air here was thick with static, and the floor pulsed with a subtle, rhythmic vibration. Within the basin, suspended in a viscous, shimmering fluid, was a single, perfectly formed crystal, a shard of the Shogun's original design, the core of the dynamo's chaotic rotation. It pulsed with a faint, hypnotic blue light, radiating a sense of profound, terrifying order. "The seed," Juro said, his voice hushed. "The initial point of the storm." As he spoke, a series of intricate glyphs began to materialize around the basin, ancient symbols of control, of dominion, of the Shogun's twisted faith. The glyphs glowed with an intense blue light, and the crystal within the basin began to spin faster, its pulsations intensifying. He wasn't simply building a dynamo, Juro realized, his eyes widening with a horrifying understanding. He was constructing a self-perpetuating system of control, a cage of energy designed to trap not just bodies, but minds. Suddenly, a voice, cold and resonant, echoed through the chamber, seemingly emanating from the crystal itself. "You cannot simply extinguish a flame," the voice hissed. "You can only contain it until you become the fuel." The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the glyphs flared with blinding intensity. Juro instinctively planted his Earth-Tether into the floor, channeling the tremors, attempting to ground the encroaching energy. Tora unleashed a furious wave of magnetic disruption, a blizzard of iron filings aimed at the crystal. But the seed was resilient. The glyphs shifted, reforming into new patterns, strengthening their hold on the Shogun's legacy. Juro knew, with a chilling certainty, that they hadn't truly won. They had merely delayed the inevitable. The Shogun's ambition wasn't dead, it was simply dormant, waiting for the opportune moment to reawaken, to spread its tendrils of control once more. He looked at Tora, at the iron-furred cat's unwavering gaze, and understood the grim truth. Their war wasn't over. It had just begun. Chapter 8, Echoes in the Stone, the Rain. A fine, persistent drizzle had begun to fall as Juro and Tora exited the Shogun's sanctum. It wasn't a cleansing rain, however, but a slow, melancholic weeping, mirroring the dampness in Juro's bones. The palace, once a monument to oppressive power, now resembled a bruised, metallic corpse, the air thick with a lingering scent of ozone and burnt bone. The cessation of the great discharge had left a profound silence, a silence that pressed against Juro's Lodestone-Core, a constant, unsettling hum. He knelt, examining the gray stone that was once his Earth-Tether. The jade was gone, consumed entirely by the process of absorbing the Shogun's chaotic energy. It felt cold, inert, a tombstone marking not just his actions, but the potential for endless, parasitic control. Tora, instinctively sensing Juro's unease, circled him, her iron fur radiating a faint, almost imperceptible magnetism. "The seed persists," Juro rasped, his voice a dry rattle. The glyphs, they weren't merely powering the dynamo. They were feeding it. He ran a calloused hand over the floor, tracing the faint outlines of the reformed symbols, spiraling glyphs of containment, now glowing with a paler, sickly blue. The Shogun didn't just want to dominate, he sought to become the current, to achieve a state of perpetual control. Their retreat led them to the periphery of the Thunder Shelf, a desolate plateau of shale and twisted, lightning-scarred rock. The Static-Lich Shogun's influence hadn't vanished. The villagers, once Jitter-Puppets, were now exhibiting a strange, hesitant stillness, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets with frayed strings. Their eyes, though devoid of the glazed terror, held a flicker of recognition, a terrifying awareness of their own captivity. Juro felt a surge of cold, visceral fury. He wouldn't allow this to be a victory built on a temporary reprieve. This was a tumor, not a vanquished enemy. "We need to disrupt the flow," he said, his gaze fixed on a cluster of jagged peaks rising in the distance. "Find the source, the roots of this symbiotic control." Tora's instincts took over. The iron filings in her fur intensified, swirling into a vortex that drew in stray magnetic currents, creating a localized field of interference. Juro activated a rudimentary sensor, a small, intricately carved shard of obsidian head salvaged from a destroyed Volt Knight's armor, and held it aloft. The obsidian pulsed weakly, tracing a chaotic, serpentine path toward the peaks. The path led them to a cavern, hidden behind a cascading curtain of water that hummed with barely contained energy. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of copper and stagnant electricity. The cavern floor was a complex network of conduits, polished steel tubes crisscrossed with copper, wiring forming a labyrinthine structure that resembled the skeletal veins of a monstrous creature. At the center pulsed a single massive crystal identical to the one in the Shogun's sanctum, but considerably larger, radiating a malevolent, almost sentient blue light. "This," Juro whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for the now gray Earth-Tether, "is the heart of the system. It's not just channeling energy, it's amplifying it, layering it, creating feedback loops, twisting the very essence of this land into a conduit for his control." Suddenly, the glyphs on the cavern walls began to shift, mirroring the movements of the crystal. The air crackled with power, and the walls seemed to pulse with a frantic, almost desperate energy. A voice, undeniably the Shogun's colder, more refined than before, echoed through the cavern. "You believe you have broken me, Groundwalker? You believe you have silenced the storm? You misunderstand. I am not a singular entity. I am the storm. I am the flow." The crystal began to rotate faster, its pulsations intensifying, bathing the cavern in an unbearable blue light. Juro realized with a chilling horror that the Shogun hadn't simply been building a machine, he had been evolving, becoming a living, breathing nexus of electromagnetic energy. This time, however, he wasn't attacking with brute force. He didn't unleash lightning. Instead, he attempted a subtle maneuver, a magnetic resonance scan. Utilizing the residual energy within his Lodestone-Core, he projected a counter-frequency, attempting to disrupt the crystal's harmonics, to introduce discord into its controlled rhythm. Tora responded with a furious barrage of magnetic disruption, not aiming to damage, but to disrupt the complex resonance. Iron filings, propelled by her will, slammed into the conduits, causing sparks to fly and the flow of energy to stutter and falter. But the Shogun, or rather, the system, anticipated it. The glyphs surged, solidifying, wrapping around Juro and Tora, forming a cage of pure energy. The air grew dense, shimmering with heat. Juro felt his skin prickling, the channels within him burning with an excruciating intensity. "You are trying to unravel what you cannot comprehend," the Shogun's voice hissed. "You are fighting against the inevitable. Your attempts to control are merely accelerating the process. Embrace the flow. Become one with the storm." The cavern began to spin, the walls blurring into a dizzying vortex of blue light. Juro knew they were losing. The Shogun's ambition wasn't being suppressed, it was being amplified, growing stronger with every moment. He looked at Tora, her iron fur shimmering wildly, her movements becoming erratic, almost frenzied. "There's no victory here, Tora," he said, his voice strained. "Only the acceptance of the cycle. We must end it." He raised his Earth-Tether, not to strike, but to absorb, to become the anchor against the rising tide. The gray stone pulsed with an eerie blue light, mirroring the crystal's frantic rhythm. The fight was not over. It was merely entering a new, terrifying phase, a desperate, agonizing struggle to silence the heart of the storm. Chapter 9. Resonance of Ruin. The spinning intensified, a nauseating waltz of blue light and fractured geometry. The energy cage solidified, coalescing into intricate glyphs that pulsed with a sickly internal luminescence. They weren't merely symbols, they were equations, complex algorithms of control, attempting to dissect Juro's very being, to quantify his resistance and adjust the flow accordingly. Tora, caught in the maelstrom, was less a predator and more a trapped hummingbird, her iron furs sparking violently, a chaotic counterpoint to the Shogun's calculated aggression. "You cling to your concept of honor," the Shogun's voice boomed, resonating within the confines of the spinning chamber. A quaint, archaic delusion. This power is not a weapon to be wielded, but a symphony to be conducted. Your attempts to disrupt are a discordant note, a jarring interruption to the intricate melody of the world's energy. Juro felt the burn deepen, not just in his skin, but within the Lodestone-Core itself. It throbbed with a frantic, desperate pulse, struggling against the imposed pressure. He focused, forcing his stillness, channeling every ounce of his being to maintain the Earth-Tether's connection to the bedrock. The jade stone grew cold beneath his touch, a meager shield against the overwhelming force. "The flow is not linear, it is emergent," the Shogun continued, his voice laced with a chillingly detached amusement. "Each resistance, each attempt to break the pattern, only strengthens the whole. You offer yourself as a conduit, willingly, allowing the energy to refine itself, to become perfect." Suddenly, a tendril of blue light snaked out from the glyphs, seeking to envelop Juro. It wasn't an attack, but an invitation, a suggestion that he surrender, that he allow himself to be consumed, to become part of the ever-expanding perfect storm. He instinctively recoiled, pushing against the force with every fiber of his being. "Tora," he rasped, his voice strained to a near-silent whisper. "Give her a grounding pulse." With a desperate burst of focused will, Tora launched herself, not with a pounce, but with a deliberate, agonizingly slow movement. She flew towards the tendril of light, extending her entire body, her iron fur erupting in a brilliant, localized storm. The effect wasn't chaotic this time. She wasn't simply disrupting the flow, but attempting to reground it, to force a point of resistance back into the system. The glyphs recoiled violently, their pulsing intensifying. The light tendril shattered, showering the chamber with sparks that sizzled against the copper spires. The spinning slowed marginally, but the pressure remained, a suffocating weight. Juro felt a searing pain erupt from the Lodestone-Core, a feeling of his very essence being unraveled, reduced to a meaningless string of data. "Foolish," the Shogun hissed, his voice laced with a genuine note of frustration. "You fight to maintain balance, but balance itself is an illusion. All systems seek equilibrium. Your efforts to resist only perpetuate the cycle." He then shifted, altering the glyphs, reshaping the energy cage into a more complex and insidious form, a spiral. The chamber began to rotate again, faster this time, the blue light a blinding, disorienting vortex. Juro realized with a chilling clarity that they weren't fighting a battle of brute force, but a battle of geometry, of resonance. The Shogun wasn't trying to kill them, he was trying to rewrite them. "You are becoming less of a man, Groundwalker," the Shogun declared, his voice echoing with an almost mournful tone. "You are becoming a vessel. Let it consume you. Let it be your salvation." He sensed Juro's despair, his growing awareness of the futility of their struggle. He was trying to appeal to the last vestiges of the ronin spirit, to offer him a perverse form of transcendence. Then, Juro did something unexpected. Instead of fighting the spiral, he shifted. He allowed his stillness to deepen, abandoning the forceful attempts to anchor himself to the earth. He didn't resist the flow, but surrendered to it, letting the energy wash over him, becoming a conduit for its chaotic intensity. "You mistake surrender for defeat," he said, his voice now a low, almost hypnotic drone. "I am not resisting the storm, I am becoming the storm." As he did, the gray stone of the Earth-Tether began to glow with an intense, shifting blue light, mirroring the spiral of the energy cage. He wasn't absorbing the energy, he was resonating with it, feeding back into the system, creating a feedback loop of escalating chaos. Tora, sensing the shift, joined him, her iron fur blazing, her movements mirroring his newfound fluidity. Together, they were no longer simply fighting, they were actively shaping the storm, guiding its chaotic energy, turning it against itself. The chamber shimmered. Reality itself seemed to fray at the edges, and Juro knew with a terrible certainty that they had stumbled upon the Shogun's true power, the ability to weaponize chaos. Chapter 10. Static Bloom. The air in the Shogun's sanctum throbbed, thick with the residue of unleashed chaos. The blue light emanating from Juro and Tora had intensified, coalescing into swirling patterns that mirrored the intricate gears of the great coil, now still and silent. The chamber, once a cathedral of oppressive copper, was suffused with a bruised, iridescent glow, a static bloom born from the collision of order and pure, untamed energy. Juro stood motionless, a sculpted monument of charcoal and jade, his skin pulsing faintly with the absorbed storm. The channels etched into his flesh, once merely lightning rods, now seemed to bloom with miniature, fractal lightning patterns, mirroring the chaos within him. He no longer felt like a vessel, he was the storm. The despair that had clung to him like a shroud had dissolved, replaced by a chilling, detached awareness, a recognition of the terrifying beauty of absolute entropy. "The coil seeks balance," he murmured, his voice a fractured echo, but balance is merely a reflection of the absence of all things. Tora, her iron fur now a shimmering, turbulent aurora, circled Juro, her movements fluid and unsettlingly precise. She wasn't attacking, she was probing, mapping the currents of energy with her magnetic senses, feeding back information to Juro through a silent telepathic connection. The cat's breath was a faint hiss of displaced air, carrying the scent of ozone and burnt metal. The Shogun's remnants, the skeletal husk that had once been a god, lay slumped against the dynamo, a grotesque parody of a man rendered into glittering dust. A thick, viscous film coated the floor, the crystallized tears of compressed energy, a testament to the destructive potential of controlled chaos. Suddenly, the shifting patterns within Juro's skin flared violently, triggering a tremor that ran through the entire chamber. A thin tendril of the static bloom reached out, not towards the Shogun's corpse, but towards the copper spires of the palace. The metal began to vibrate, then hummed, then screamed a high-pitched metallic wail that threatened to shatter the very air. "It's a feedback loop," Tora communicated, her thought a cold, urgent pressure against Juro's mind. The Shogun wasn't merely generating power, he was feeding on the instability he created, the chaos it craves to expand. Juro understood. The Shogun's power wasn't about control. It was about creation, the creation of a world perpetually on the brink of collapse. He took a step forward, his movements slow, deliberate, as if wading through molasses. "We have turned his weapon against himself," he said, "but we have also unleashed something far more dangerous." As he spoke, the violet light of the storm outside intensified, rushing into the chamber through cracks in the copper spires. It wasn't a storm of rain and wind. It was a storm of information, of raw, unfiltered potential. The air shimmered, not just with energy, but with possible futures, branching timelines of destruction and rebirth, each one reflecting a myriad of choices, each one a terrifying possibility. The Iron Cat, sensing the influx, arched her back, her magnetic fur intensifying, expanding to encompass the entire chamber. She was attempting to contain the storm, to channel its chaotic energy back into the dormant great coil. But the coil was no longer dormant, it was a wild, untamed thing, a vortex of possibility. "You are trying to control what cannot be controlled," Juro said, his voice resonating with an almost agonizing clarity. "The storm does not obey, it becomes." He raised Earth-Tether, the jade blade pulsing with the same iridescent blue light as his skin. This time, he didn't aim for a single point. Instead, he began to draw the chaotic energy into himself, not to absorb it, but to conduct it, to shape it, to sculpt it into a weapon. The blade transformed, its form shifting and morphing, becoming a cascade of interlocking lightning bolts, a miniature, self-contained storm. The air crackled with ozone, and the scent of burnt metal intensified, becoming almost suffocating. "I am not fighting the storm," Juro said, his voice now a guttural roar. "I am conducting it." He lunged forward, not at the Shogun's corpse, but at the heart of the dynamo. The miniature storm erupted from Earth-Tether, striking the gears with a focused blast of pure energy. The gears shrieked, then buckled, then exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The great coil, the source of the Shogun's power, was tearing itself apart from within. As the last spark died, a single, perfect sphere of solidified energy materialized in the center of the chamber, a miniature, contained storm, pulsing with the same violet light as the night sky. It drifted towards Juro, drawn by an irresistible force. He didn't try to stop it. He simply stood there, a silent, still figure amidst the wreckage, his skin radiating a bone-chilling cold, a final testament to the price of understanding. The sphere brushed against his hand, and for a brief, agonizing moment, Juro felt his consciousness dissolve, becoming one with the storm, a static bloom blooming in the heart of a shattered empire. Tora, watching the sphere coalesce, let out a single mournful meow, a sound that echoed through the silent chamber like the last note of a dying song. Then, she vanished, absorbed by the sphere, a magnetic ghost lost within the storm. Chapter 11. Static Bloom. The silence after the sphere's embrace was heavier than the copper-stained air. Juro stood, unmoving, his body now an obsidian sculpture against the ruined grandeur of the Shogun's sanctum. The violet luminescence had faded from his skin, leaving only a chilling gray, the color of a grave. He wasn't breathing, not in the conventional sense. The Lodestone-Core, once a driving force, now pulsed with a faint residual energy, a whisper of the storm had become. Tora, the magnetic cat, returned slowly, coalescing from the dissipating energy field. Her iron filings shimmered with an unsettling iridescence, and her eyes, once a vibrant amber, were now twin pools of solidified static. She circled Juro once, a silent question in her gaze, before settling down at his feet, her weight a strangely comforting pressure against the fractured stone floor. The villagers, freed from the Jitter-Puppet state, stumbled through the palace doors, a confused and vulnerable mass. They were pale, their muscles atrophied from years of forced exertion, their eyes vacant and struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had transpired. Some knelt, whispering prayers to forgotten gods. Others simply stared, overwhelmed by the sudden cessation of the hum, the absence of the agonizing electrical impulses that had dictated their every thought and movement. Elder Kenji, a man who'd spent his life meticulously tending a single rice paddy before the Shogun's optimization, approached Juro with a hesitant reverence. He was old, his body bent with age and hardship, but his eyes held a spark of something akin to hope. "Ronin-sama," he said, his voice a dry rasp. You ended it. You ended the static." Juro didn't respond. He didn't need to. The sphere, now a dull gray orb no larger than his fist, lay nestled in the palm of his hand. It pulsed with a barely perceptible tremor, a tiny contained storm struggling to be born. He raised his hand slowly, revealing the sphere to the assembled villagers. "This," he grunted, "the sound guttural and ancient, is not a weapon. It is a memory, a fractured echo of the Shogun's ambition." A young woman, Hana, one of the first to regain full mobility, stepped forward. She was a weaver, her fingers once nimble with silk, now clumsy from disuse. "What do we do with it, Ronin-sama?" It feels dangerous." Juro studied the sphere, his charcoal black channels seeming to deepen as he focused his attention. "The lightning cannot be contained, only redirected. The current must be returned to the source." This sphere, it is the final, imperfect discharge. It will feed the earth. He raised his Earth-Tether, the jade blade now slick with a residue of violet energy. With a deliberate, agonizingly slow movement, he plunged the blade into the floor, aiming not at the sphere, but at the fissure that had opened beneath the shattered dynamo. As the jade touched the ground, the sphere shuddered violently. The violet light intensified, spiraling outward in a miniature vortex. The air crackled with ozone, and a wave of heat washed over the chamber, hot enough to blister skin. The earth beneath Juro trembled, and a deep, resonant hum filled the space, not the sterile, oppressive hum of the Shogun's power, but a primal, earthy resonance. Suddenly, fissures spread across the chamber floor, widening with alarming speed. The walls themselves began to groan and shift, as if responding to a colossal, subterranean heartbeat. The villagers screamed, scattering in panic. Tora, sensing the shift, launched herself into the chaos, her iron filings swirling around her like a protective shroud. She intercepted stray bolts of energy that still flickered from the decaying machinery, disrupting their flow and directing them towards the expanding fissures. Juro remained motionless, a statue of stoic defiance amidst the escalating destruction. He didn't try to control the process, didn't fight it. He simply conducted it. As the earth swallowed the last vestiges of the Shogun's power, the violet sphere began to expand, growing larger with each passing moment until it filled the entire chamber. Then, with a final blinding flash, it vanished. When the light subsided, the chamber was irrevocably transformed. The copper spires of the Shogun's palace were gone, reduced to heaps of shimmering dust. The walls had collapsed, revealing a natural cavern beneath, filled with a network of underground rivers and geothermal vents. The air was clean, purged of the metallic tang of electricity. Juro knelt, his body now completely drained of energy. The Lodestone-Core had stilled, returning him to a state of serene, absolute nothingness. His skin was entirely gray. The final layer of charcoal vanished, as if had been sculpted from the stone itself. Tora, now almost entirely composed of iron filings, nudged his hand with her nose, a gesture of profound, silent gratitude. She then turned and vanished, not back into the sphere but into the newly formed network of geothermal vents, disappearing as silently as she had appeared. Juro remained, a monument to a shattered empire, a testament to the absolute stillness required to disrupt the flow of power. He was no longer a ronin, not in the traditional sense. He was something else entirely, a grounding point, a nexus of silent resistance, and a walking, breathing echo of the storm. The groundwalker, finally at rest. Chapter 12. Echoes in the stone. The rain had stopped. It wasn't a gentle, cleansing rain, but a relentless obsidian drizzle that clung to the cavern walls, a perpetual slickness reflecting the pale mineral light filtering from the geothermal vents. It was a rain born of disruption, of a world unmade and remade. Juro sat motionless amongst the rubble of the Shogun's palace, a statue carved not from marble, but from the very absence of energy. He felt nothing. Not pain, not exhaustion, not even the faint hum of the Lodestone-Core. It was a perfect, absolute stillness, a state of being so profound it bordered on non-existence. Tora, a shifting constellation of iron filings, pulsed with a low, rhythmic vibration near his hand. She hadn't returned to the vanished violet sphere. Instead, Shed burrowed deep into the newly revealed geothermal network, the nascent rivers bubbling with a strange, nascent warmth. Juro understood, instinctively, that Shed become a part of this new world, a creature of heat and magnetic flux, a living embodiment of the chaos they'd unleashed. Days, or what passed for days in this timeless cavern, drifted by. The villagers, freed from the Shogun's Galvanic-Slavery, began to emerge from the surrounding villages. They were different. Not physically altered, but possessed of a quiet clarity, a slow, deliberate grace, that hadn't existed before. The frantic twitching, the vacant stares, the mechanical obedience all gone. They moved with a newfound awareness, a sense of ownership over their own bodies and minds. They called Juro Silent Stone, a name spoken with reverence and a hesitant hope. One of them, a young woman named Hana, approached him. She carried a simple offering, a handful of smooth gray stones gathered from the riverbed, polished by the geothermal waters. "The earth remembers," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "It remembers the storm. And it remembers you." Juro didn't respond. He simply raised a hand, his gray skin smooth and cold, and accepted the stones. As his fingers brushed against them, a faint tremor ran through him, a resonance not of energy, but of memory. Fleeting images flashed through his mind: the Shogun's palace, the Volt Knights, the blinding flash of the violet sphere. But they weren't his memories. They were echoes of the Shogun's reign, imprinted upon the fabric of the cavern, now laid bare. "The Static-Lich sought to control the flow," Hana continued, "to bend the world to his will. But you shattered it. You showed us how to listen to the earth, to find our own currents." Suddenly, a low, grinding sound echoed through the cavern. The geothermal vents pulsed with increased intensity, and a shimmering distortion appeared in the air ahead. It wasn't the violet hue of the sphere, but a deeper, almost bruised gray, the color of Juro's own skin. From the distortion emerged a figure. Not a warrior, not a knight, but a construct, a towering automaton fashioned from polished bronze and intricately etched iron. It moved with a jerky, unsettling precision, its joints grinding with each step. It was a sentinel, a remnant of the Shogun's most advanced defense systems, activated by the sudden disruption of the power grid. This sentinel wasn't equipped with lightning bolts. Instead, it carried a device, a massive, parabolic mirror, coated with a substance that shimmered with captured magnetic fields. It moved with a chillingly deliberate purpose, scanning the cavern with a single cyclopean eye. "Target identified," a synthesized voice rasped from the sentinel's core. "Anomaly detected. Deviation from established magnetic baseline. Neutralizing sequence initiated." The sentinel began to emit a field of intense, localized magnetism, a wave of invisible force designed to disrupt and counteract any remaining energy signatures. Juro felt the familiar pull, not of electricity, but of magnetic force, a subtle pressure building against his body. Tora, sensing the threat, surged forward, a swirling cloud of iron filings directly confronting the sentinel. The battle wasn't one of swordplay, but of resonant frequencies. Tora bombarded the sentinel with concentrated magnetic pulses, while the sentinel unleashed its counterforce. The air crackled with static, and the cavern walls vibrated with the intensity of the conflict. Juro remained utterly still, a passive anchor, absorbing the chaotic energy and grounding it within himself. As the sentinel's magnetic field intensified, Juro felt his Lodestone-Core begin to strain. The perfect stillness was fracturing, the pressure building to a critical point. He realized, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that the sentinel wasn't merely defending the Shogun's legacy. It was seeking to erase him, to return him to the state of absolute nothingness from which had emerged. He pushed back. He didn't attack, didn't defend. He simply dissolved the magnetic field, drawing it into himself, channeling the force through his body and back into the earth. The sentinel shuddered, its movements becoming increasingly erratic. With a final, desperate surge, Juro focused his entire being, the grounded remnants of his former self, on a single precise point. A flicker of gray light erupted from his hand, solidifying into a shard of volcanic jade. He hurled the shard at the sentinel's eye. The jade struck true, shattering the cyclopean lens. The sentinel froze, its movements ceasing abruptly. It slumped to the ground, a silent, broken monument to the Shogun's ambition. As the sentinel fell, the violet dust began to coalesce once more, not into the sphere, but into a cluster of smaller, shimmering orbs. Echoes. Each orb pulsed with a fragment of the Shogun's power, trapped and contained. Juro knew then that their fight wasn't over. The echoes wouldn't simply vanish. They would remain, a constant reminder of the price of unchecked ambition and a source of potential danger. He turned to Hana, a new stillness settling over him. "We must learn to contain them," he finally said, his voice the quiet murmur of stone. "We must learn to listen to the earth, not just to the storm." Chapter 13. The chorus of silence. The rain in the thunder shelf had ceased, but the air remained thick with the scent of ozone and damp earth, a residue of the Shogun's demise. Juro, his skin a mask of gray, moved through the ruins of the Copper Palace with an unsettling grace. Tora, nestled in his lap, a surprisingly warm weight considering the man's altered state, watched with unnervingly intelligent amber eyes. Hana, a young woman from a nearby village, her movements still hesitant, but marked with a nascent determination, meticulously documented the shimmering orbs with charcoal on a salvaged sheet of parchment. "The echoes," Juro said, his voice a low rumble, "are not inherently malevolent. They are simply resonance. Fragments of will, amplified and desperate for a channel." He gestured with Earth-Tether, the jade blade now a dull obsidian stone, almost swallowed by his hand. Each pulse, each flicker, represents a moment of the Shogun's ambition, a shard of his control. To understand them, we must learn to harmonize with their frequency. Their task was now clear: to contain the echoes, to prevent them from coalescing into something more dangerous. The Sentinel's demise hadn't eradicated the threat, merely shifted it. These fractured remnants of the Shogun's power were a chaotic tide, seeking to rebuild, to reassert control. Hana, guided by Juro's cryptic instructions, began experimenting. She had fashioned small, intricately woven cages from iron wire, mimicking the patterns found on Tora's fur. The echoes, initially swirling with an agitated violet light, responded. They pulsed faster, drawing closer to the cages, but never fully entering. "As resisting?" Hana said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The cages are disrupting his flow, but his not broken. As adaptable, like a current seeking the path of least resistance." Juro remained silent, observing. He noticed a subtle shift in Tora, the magnetic cat's fur intensifying, becoming almost painfully bright. The cat was instinctively feeding off the echoes, stabilizing them, drawing them into a calmer, more predictable rhythm. Tora is providing a natural grounding, Juro realized. The cat's inherent magnetic field acts as a counter-frequency, dampening the chaotic energy. He began to instruct Hana on a new technique, a rhythmic pulsing of Earth-Tether, mirroring the fluctuations of the echoes. It was a delicate dance, a manipulation of electrical potential, a conversation with the fragmented remnants of a god's ambition. As they worked, a deeper chill descended upon the palace. The air shimmered, and from the corners of the vast ruined chamber, faint, ghostly images began to materialize. Flickers of the Shogun's court, the gleam of Volt Knight armor, the unsettling blue glow of the plasma cage fleeting, incomplete snapshots of his reign, imprinted onto the very fabric of the space. "As projecting memories," Juro said, his voice strained. "Not conscious recollections, but pure, unfiltered intent. The desire to control, to dominate. It's a living echo, constantly replaying itself." Suddenly, a particularly potent echo burst forth, a vision of Juro as a young samurai, before the Lodestone-Core, before the grounding. He saw himself, arrogant and proud, wielding a perfectly honed katana, a bright burning fire in his eyes. A younger version of the Shogun, a boy barely more than a child, kneeling before him, offering a single perfectly formed copper coin. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Juro staggering, clutching his head. He felt a searing pain, a fracturing of his own memories, as if a piece of his past was being forcibly stripped away. The echoes aren't just absorbing his power, he gasped. They're attempting to rebuild him. To fill the void with his own ambition. Tora, sensing Juro's distress, launched himself from his lap, a swirling vortex of iron dust. He targeted the largest echo, a pulsating core of violet energy that dominated the chamber. With a precise calculated movement, he enveloped the echo in a magnetic field, effectively suffocating it. But as the echo dissipated, a new one emerged, smaller, more insidious. It manifested as a faint, whispering voice, directly in Juro's mind. You are weak. You cling to the earth. Embrace the flow. Become one with the lightning. Juro gritted his teeth, fighting the intrusive thought. Silence, he roared, slamming Earth-Tether into the ground. The gray stone pulsed with a brief, agonizing flare of violet energy, severing the connection. Hana, witnessing Juro's struggle, understood the gravity of the situation. We need to sever the connection, she urged, to isolate the echoes entirely. We need to create a space of absolute silence, a void where he cannot influence us. Juro looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the flickering violet light of the remaining echoes. He knew she was right. The fight wasn't just about containing the fragments of the Shogun's power, it was about protecting his own mind, his own identity, from being consumed by the remnants of a shattered empire. The chorus of silence, he realized, was about to begin. Chapter 14. The Chamber of Dissolution. The air in the Shogun's sanctum thickened, not with ozone and crackling energy, but with a suffocating silence, broken only by the rasping breaths of Juro and Hana. The violet echoes, once a chaotic storm of psychic intrusion, had coalesced into a dozen smaller, more focused manifestations shimmering motes of thought, each whispering variations on the same seductive lie: you are weak. You cling to the earth. Embrace the flow. Tora, exhausted from his earlier exertions, lay curled at Juro's feet, his iron fur dull and still, a silent testament to the battle waged within his mind. The cat's movements were sluggish, his usually keen senses clouded by the psychic residue. Juro felt a phantom pressure behind his eyes, the insistent pull of the Shogun's ambition, subtly attempting to reroot itself within his core. Hana, Juro said, his voice a gravelly echo. The silence. It's not empty. It's a pressure, like a stone slowly crushing. Hana, a woman sculpted from stoicism and the quiet resilience of the mountain folk, nodded grimly. She was meticulously arranging a series of ceramic basins filled with powdered obsidian, strategically placed around the chamber. Each basin acted as a miniature Faraday cage, attempting to dampen the residual electromagnetic fields. The echoes aren't just absorbing his power, she continued, her movements deliberate and precise. They're attempting to rebuild him, to fill the void with his own ambition. The violet light, though diminished, remained concentrated around the edges of the room, flickering with an unnerving intelligence. Juro could sense the echoes probing, searching for vulnerabilities, attempting to map the contours of his own resistance. He gripped Earth-Tether, the jade cold against his charred skin, a desperate anchor in the swirling chaos. We need to create a space of absolute silence, a void where he cannot influence us, Juro stated, his focus unwavering. He began a series of slow, deliberate movements, mimicking the ritualistic stillness he had learned from his master, a meditation technique designed to center the self, to become a null point in the universe's currents. It was a dangerous gambit. Amplifying his stillness could make him an even more potent target for the echo's influence. As he moved, Hana began chanting in a low guttural tongue, a dialect lost to most, a language rumored to be born from the magnetic fields themselves. The chant wasn't intended to attack the echoes, but to disrupt their resonance, to introduce a discordant note into their carefully constructed patterns. With each syllable, the violet light pulsed erratically, and the whispers intensified, becoming almost a chorus of tormented voices. Suddenly, one of the echoes, bolder than the others, manifested directly within Juro's mind, not as a voice, but as a vivid sensation, a blinding flash of white-hot lightning. The feeling of being utterly consumed, of his very self dissolving into an endless electric torrent. He instinctively slammed Earth-Tether into the obsidian floor, channeling the energy back into the mountain, a searing counterpoint to the invading force. The flash subsided, leaving him momentarily disoriented, his vision momentarily blurred with gray static. "It's feeding on the shock," Hana yelled, her voice strained. "We need to break the rhythm. Disrupt the flow." She gestured to Tora, who, spurred into action, launched himself at one of the larger echoes, a swirling storm of iron filings that momentarily disrupted the violet light. However, the attempt was half-hearted, driven by exhaustion, and the knowledge that a direct confrontation was a losing proposition. Juro realized the flaw in their strategy. They were fighting a psychic battle with instruments of physics, attempting to contain a phenomenon that defied both. He needed a new approach, a way to exploit the echo's inherent nature. "Silence isn't simply the absence of sound," he said, his eyes fixed on the pulsing violet core. "It's the creation of a space where sound cannot exist. We need to introduce a paradox." He raised Earth-Tether above his head, focusing his energy, not on grounding the lightning, but on generating a localized distortion in the magnetic field, a brief, contained surge of chaotic energy. It wasn't a forceful attack, it was a deliberate, unsettling anomaly, a ripple in the fabric of the echo's reality. The effect was immediate. The violet light fractured, splintered, and multiplied, each shard vibrating with a discordant frequency. The whispers intensified, not with seductive promises, but with raw, confused anguish. The echoes, accustomed to a singular, focused ambition, were overwhelmed by the sheer chaos of Juro's intervention. "They're fracturing," Hana shouted, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and triumph. "It's working." But as the initial chaos subsided, a new echo emerged, smaller, more insidious. It manifested as a faint, whispering voice directly in Juro's mind. "You are still weak. You cling to the earth. Embrace the flow. Become one with the lightning." The cycle began anew. Chapter 15. The resonance of oblivion. The air in the Shogun's sanctum, once thick with the oppressive hum of the great coil, now thrummed with a fractured, almost unbearable dissonance. Shards of violet light still danced like malevolent fireflies, remnants of Juro's initial intervention, but they were no longer focused. They pulsed with an erratic, chaotic rhythm, echoing the growing unease in Hana's voice. "It's unstable," she gasped, clutching her modified sonic dampener, a device fashioned from polished obsidian and intricately carved bone. "The echoes are not reacting to disruption. They're feeding on it." Juro remained motionless, a silhouette against the swirling violet, his skin a mask of charcoal black, the lines etched deeper by the unrelenting barrage of fragmented whispers. He felt the insidious voice, now a persistent drone within his mind, growing stronger, weaving itself into the core of his Lodestone-Core. It promised effortless power, a complete dissolution of self, a terrifying allure of becoming one with the very storm head intended to quell. "Don't engage," he rasped, his voice a dry scrape against the cavernous silence. "It's bait, a lure to shatter what remains of our composure." Tora, sensing the shift in Juro's focus, padded silently around him, a shifting, restless cloud of iron filings. The cat paused, its head tilted, emitting a faint, high-pitched whine that resonated with the fracturing violet light. "The magnetic field is collapsing around the core," Hana observed, her voice strained. "The Shogun's cage isn't just failing, it's actively being unmade. Not by a singular force, but by countless points of interference." Juro understood. The echoes, perpetually hungry for ambition, weren't merely resisting his attempts to ground the lightning. They were growing from the chaos, multiplying exponentially with each jarring fluctuation in the magnetic field. Had inadvertently created a resonance chamber, a space where the echoes of desire and ambition warped and amplified into something monstrous. "We've shifted the battlefield," he said, his gaze fixed on the fractured violet core, now pulsating with a sickening, iridescent sheen. "We can't fight it with force. We must fight it with absence." He raised Earth-Tether again, not this time with a calculated surge of energy, but with a deliberate, almost reverent stillness. He wasn't attempting to disrupt the magnetic field, he was attempting to nullify it. He focused his entire being on creating a pocket of perfect magnetic neutrality, a space where the echoes, reliant on the chaotic flow, would find themselves adrift, starved. The violet light flickered violently, reacting to this deliberate absence. The discordant frequencies intensified, becoming a deafening, swirling vortex of sound and sensation. Hana screamed, shielding her ears, her dampener straining under the onslaught. Tora unleashed a torrent of iron filings, not as a weapon, but as a desperate attempt to anchor the collapsing magnetic field. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The violet light retracted, shrinking back into the core, leaving a gaping void where the pulsing energy had been. The fragmented whispers ceased. The deafening dissonance was replaced by an unnerving silence, a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure against Juro's skull. But the silence was not empty. It contained something far more unsettling, a feeling of profound, absolute nothingness. A sense of being utterly forgotten, erased from existence. He felt the insidious voice within him recede, replaced by a cold, vast emptiness. He understood with a chilling clarity what had done. He hadn't simply silenced the echoes. Had starved them. Had created a void within their reality, a space where their desires, their ambitions, their very existence couldn't find purchase. But as the last vestiges of the emptiness settled, a new echo arose, fainter than the others, yet far more terrifying. It wasn't a voice, but a thought, projected directly into his mind. "You are learning to fear silence." Suddenly, Juro felt a sharp, agonizing pressure behind his eyes. He stumbled, clutching his head, his skin growing colder, the charcoal-black channels glowing with an unnatural, sickly blue light. The magnetic burial, the forbidden reversal of his Lodestone-Core, was no longer a controlled defense. It was unraveling, feeding the very void had created. Hana rushed to his side, her face etched with horror. "Juro, what's happening?" Juro looked down at his hand, now glowing with a pulsating blue light. He realized with sickening certainty that he wasn't merely absorbing energy. He was becoming it. The Shogun's power, the Echo's ambition, the very void of oblivion, they were all flowing into him, consuming him, rewriting his very being. "The silence it wants to be filled," he whispered, his voice now a hollow resonance. "And I am the vessel."